Hi everyone, today we are going to discuss about the ascending tracts of the spinal cord. Now the ascending tracts of the spinal cord are listed over here, and these tracts they arise from the spinal cord and they end somewhere in the cerebral cortex or cerebellum or within the brain stem, and usually the name suggests the origin of the neurons and where are they going to end in the specific nucleus within the brain. For example, you could see spinothalamic tract I've listed at the start of this slide. Now it means that it arises from the spinal cord and it ends somewhere in the thalamus. Not completely ends there, but the information which is specific regarding certain sensation, it reaches that specific nucleus within a specific part of the brain and then further on to the other parts of the brain. So we'll discuss these tracts today, and today we'll focus on spinothalamic tracts and the arrangement of neurons that is discussed while explaining these tracts. So in this slide you could see there are some labeled ascending tracts mentioned in one half of the spinal cord, though they are present at both halves of the spinal cord. This is just for the sake of understanding. And you can see that there are different types of tracts over here. So you could see there is anterior spinothalamic tract and lateral spinothalamic tract. They both are present anterolaterally in the anterior aspect of the spinal cord. And in between lies another tract called spinotectal tract. Now we'll see that later on these three tracts are called spinal lemniscus, which develops within the medulla oblongata and takes the information so on and so forth to the brain. Then a little in front and a little lateral, you could see two other tracts, anterior spinocerebellar and posterior spinocerebellar tracts. These lie a little laterally to the spinothalamic tracts. So they are also both anterior and posterior, and they seem to end within cerebellum somewhere. Also, you could see another tract which is spino-olivary nucleus. We'll discuss about these tracts later on in detail, but these nuclei, spino-olivary tract and these anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts, these three are associated with the cerebellum. And you can see two other tracts together, they are called posterior white column, and they both are separated by a septum. On the medial side is fasciculus gracilis and on the lateral side fasciculus cuneatus. These both are important tracts because as compared to other tracts, there is something that is different about these. These are involved in forming the sensory decussation within the brain, and also they are involved in formation of medial lemniscus, the fibers arising from these tracts. And also there is something about this tract which is different from the others, the presence or location of the second order ganglion, which is not within the spinal cord, but it is somewhere in the brain, which is different from the other tracts which have their second order neuron usually present within the spinal cord. In this slide you can see anatomical organization of the neurons when we talk about the ascending tracts. So we'll usually discuss about the first order, second order and third order neurons. So in this slide you could see, in this figure in fact you could see there is a pathway that is taking us towards the cortex of the brain. So there is a sensory nerve ending. So this could be a free nerve ending, these could be Pacinian corpuscles or Meissner corpuscles, whatever the information is taken from the outside of the body towards the spinal cord. For example, there is a sensation of painful stimuli. Now this sensation is going to be taken through the peripheral processes from the receptor towards the dorsal root ganglion. This is the first order neuron in the pathway. This gives a central process which synapses to the second order neuron, most of the times present within the spinal cord. We talked about the gray matter the other day, and there are several neurons which take up certain sensations. So these neurons are responsible to take that sensation and convey it to the brain. The fibers may cross to the opposite side or they may stay on the same side. But most of the times we'll discuss that fibers, they do cross the opposite sides. So the opposite half of the body is being controlled by the other half of the brain. Right side is controlled by the left side of the brain. So this is what the mechanism shows here. The fibers, they cross, they ascend, and their third order neuron lies somewhere within the brain. Here it is the nucleus of the thalamus, which becomes the third order neuron for the specific tract. Later on, this information goes through the cerebral cortex certain area through the white matter of the brain. We'll discuss about the tracts and their neurons one by one in different tracts. So this is how the arrangement is there of the neurons, first order, second order, and third order, which is important to understand before we go into the detail of the ascending tracts. So the first tract which we are going to discuss is lateral spinothalamic tract, and the table in a nice way summarizes how this tract works and goes from first order to the third order neuron and where the destination lies. So the sensation received by this tract is pain and temperature. The receptors are free nerve endings, so they take the sensation of pain or thermal sensations which go to the dorsal root ganglion, the first order neuron present outside the spinal cord. And then the second order neuron is the substantia gelatinosa, the same neurons in the gray matter responsible to receive the sensation of pain and temperature. Then the third order neurons are present within the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus, and later on these fibers ascend to the posterior central gyrus because these are sensory information, pain and temperature, both of them. That is why they are going to be received by the parietal lobe, where is present the posterior central gyrus. So in this slide you can see that I have summarized the pathway of lateral spinothalamic tract, and you can see the arrangement of first, second and third order neurons here. The first order neuron is again dorsal root ganglion, second is substantia gelatinosa, and third is VPL nucleus of thalamus. So the sensation received is of pain and temperature, which enters the dorsal root ganglion. The central fibers of dorsal root ganglion synapse with the substantia gelatinosa nuclei. Now you can see the fibers crossing towards the opposite side, and for lateral spinothalamic they cross within one spinal segment. The fibers, they cross and then they ascend through medulla oblongata. Now these fibers are present between inferior olivary nucleus and spinal tract of trigeminal nucleus within medulla oblongata. When the fibers are present with medulla oblongata, they are going to join the anterior spinothalamic tract and the spinotactal tract to form the spinal lemniscus. Now this spinal lemniscus is going to ascend through the posterior part of the pons, through the tectum of the midbrain, which is present in the anterior part of the midbrain, and on all the way they are going to enter the VPL nucleus of the thalamus to relay the sensation of whatever may be the thing, pain, temperature or both. They are going to be received by VPL. Now this is a third order neuron, and from here the information through the internal capsule fibers and corona radiata, which are the white matter of the cerebral cortex, this information is going to go through these fibers to the cerebral cortex, the posterior central gyrus lying behind the central sulcus within the parietal lobe. And later on this information is going to be relayed to the motor area. See, whenever there is a painful stimuli, you are not going to stay like this. There's going to be stimuli and there's going to be reflex response by removing your hand from that painful thing, or your foot from that painful thing, or your body totally away from that painful thing. So this is then a motor response to this sensation. So this is how the lateral spinothalamic tract works. So let's briefly discuss about the anterior spinothalamic tract. Not very different from lateral spinothalamic tract. Again, the things that differ are the sensation. The sensation this time is of light touch or crude touch and pressure received by the receptor, which are again the free nerve endings. And it is going to reach the same neurons as that of lateral spinothalamic to reach a destination which is also similar, posterior central gyrus. In this slide, just briefly summarizing anterior spinothalamic tract, which is not very different from the lateral spinothalamic tract. You could see the sensation taken by this tract is light touch and pressure. For example, if feather touches your hand, you feel that, and the information enters the dorsal root ganglion through the peripheral process. It is relayed by the central process towards the second order neuron present within the spinal cord, which is again substantia gelatinosa. Now this information in the form of tracts crosses towards the opposite side, but there's a difference from the lateral spinothalamic tract. In lateral spinothalamic tract, the fibers, they cross over within one spinal segment, whereas in this tract they cross within several spinal segments. So the fibers keep on crossing and then they ascend through the brain stem to reach the thalamus. The rest of the arrangement is the same, that spinal lemniscus is formed in medulla oblongata, and this lemniscus then takes up the information to the VBL nucleus of the thalamus. And from here, through the white matter of the brain, internal capsule and corona radiata, the information enters the parietal lobe, the posterior central gyrus, and then is taken to the other parts of the brain to take the certain action.